You ever feel like you're just sitting around waiting on something? Just waiting on something to happen? Gets old, man. Tried to make stuff happen. Try to spot timing, get things to happen. Hit the right windows. It's all just kind of a chasing after the wind. But there's a purpose to everything. I've kind of worn my body to pieces running so hard, trying to use my gifts and talents to try to make a difference in people's lives. And I've always been a big thinker. Most people that aren't big thinkers don't know how to deal with big thinkers. They think that something is critically wrong with their personality. They never stop to think that maybe they should look in the mirror, that maybe something's wrong with theirs. Wasn't for big thinkers, this country never would have existed. But somehow there's so many people in this country that are such small-minded thinkers that they think because they can't do something, no one else can. And that kind of myopathy has pissed me off my entire life. Just being honest. I know that's not popular. People like lies now. When I was in college, after I left the University of Alabama, I was at St. Louis University, and my counselor, my academic advisor, kind of coach was a guy by the name of Dr. Barasevic. Dr. B kind of treated me like a son, and he allowed me to kind of create my own curriculum and stuff. He saw something in me. He was one of a handful of people that we get through our lives that, have vision, see potential, want to be a part of, bringing that out of others. And I'll never forget, one day he sat me down and he said, "Max, I've spent my life trying to get people to think outside of the box. I don't have to do that with you. You were born outside of a box." And he smiled kind of mischievously, as he was prone to do. And he said, "Son, what you're going to have to learn to deal with and overcome in this world is a world where most people have locked themselves inside their own boxes." Oh, how true that is. And he went on to say, you also have to deal with those people, those same ones that have locked themselves inside their own boxes, trying to force you into one even smaller than theirs. Once again, how true is that? You grow up in this world and they tell you got to learn to do one thing and do it well. Well, I've always enjoyed doing a lot of different things. I've always had an insatiable hunger for learning and understanding things, and so I've done it. I teach myself. I learn from everything. And it doesn't matter where you go. Most people in this world will always try to put you in a smaller box than the one that they've given up to, their own. It's true. Doesn't matter what your station in life. It doesn't matter where you go in the world, what you do, but it's particularly prevalent here because of the time we're in our nation's history. That people have become very closed-minded in how they view everything, especially themselves and their relationship to others. Oh, how true the words of Dr. B have been in my life. I've had to deal with them every single day. And it's been an interesting journey. See, when you're a musician, everybody thinks you know everything about music. And they try to keep you in that box. When you're an athlete, they want to lock you in that box and say that's the only thing you can do. And that you're not capable of much else beyond that. When you're creative and an artist, they want to lock you in that box and make all these assumptions as well about you and your personality and your capabilities, and they can't help themselves. If you're in a certain industry, or you have a certain hobby, or you're from a certain area, or you talk a certain way, or you wear a certain thing, well, of course, I mean, they want to put you in a box. Because this world judges everything by appearances. It doesn't judge beyond skin deep. It's as shallow as a piece of paper. That should tell you the kind of people that run it. Because they're the ones that project it down on everybody else. It's kind of, it's not trickle down, it's false light kind of raining down like the moonlight on me right now, right above my head. So they diminish others either because of their own insecurities, their own fears, their own jealousies, or they're simply just too damn ignorant to think beyond it. They're not even cognizant. But most people are cognizant. Most people know exactly what they do and why. To some degree. It's just there's enough of them and enough people that have agreed with them to do the same thing that they just keep on doing it. That's how this whole thing kind of functions. It's a social contract, right? And that social contract is not something you sign. It's something that's put on you when you come out of the womb eventually. And it's used to divide and conquer everybody and to keep everybody in chains. Heaven forbid God give people gifts and talents beyond what somebody in school or their family or their friends or whoever tells them is possible. I remember when I lived in Harrisburg in junior high, I can't remember the man. Some of you guys in Harrisburg might remember. I think he taught band or something. And I was taking trumpet. I was doing trumpet. And he told me, Max, you're going to have to choose one instrument and do it well. At the time, I was taking piano lessons and stuff as well. And I looked at him, I said, why? Why can't I do all of them? Well, that was not encouraged. Probably because he was not encouraged to do it. I don't fault him for it. I mean, he was trying to get me to focus on the task at hand, which he thought was most important. But I've always been well-rounded and looked at doing multiple things. It's what has made me the person I am today in a lot of ways, for better or for worse. And I don't just study one thing, I study a whole bunch of things. And I continue to study, continue to learn, and I have a foundation in place that goes back to when I was a kid. And all of those things work together, and it gives me insights on things that a lot of people, don't have. So if I sit down with, I sat down with one person, it was up in Richmond. And this young lady was a pharmacist, I think, had gone and gotten her postgraduate work done at a pharmacy college. And we were discussing some of the problems going on within Big Pharma. And whenever I opened my mouth to talk about stuff, she would just try to berate the hell out of me. Finally, I looked at her, I'm like, can you shut your mouth? Just because 4 grains of sand about one single thing doesn't mean that you know everything, and it doesn't mean that other people don't have something to contribute, whether it's me or anybody else at this table. And I guarantee you, I probably know more about what your industry is doing to America than you'll ever know before you go into a graveyard if you don't wake up and start humbling yourself and think about what it is that you do and how you work. Well, she was offended, of course. What the hell do you know about pharmacy? What do you know about pharmaceutical sciences? You can't deal with people like that. They're just stupid bitches. Or assholes. You can be nice to them, you can be kind to them, but never let them walk on you. All right? You don't have to walk on eggshells for these shallow fools. You can say, well, that's not being loving. No, actually it is. It's called tough love. It's probably the reason why they wound up the way they did, that they never had it. They were never disciplined. They were never taught one thing from another. They were thought they were a little princess or a little prince, right? Never paid any consequences for anything. If you don't discipline your kids with positive and negative as necessary, you're going to raise stupid people, because when they become adults, they're not going to know a damn thing, and they're going to be entitled to everything, and their life is going to wind up becoming very hard. And the very thing that you wanted to protect them from, right, and coddle them, actually creates the very conditions for them to be crushed by the storms of life that come. You need to nurture and you need to toughen up. Not one or the other, but both, in the right context. Now look at our country right now, on both sides. Can you tell me that we're mature? That we're acting mature? That we're thinking through things? We are so diverted by a single thing that we cannot see past it to look to something beyond where we're at right now, to shoot for something in the future, the near future, to get things back on track. That is exactly what your enemies want. you to remain diverted and not come together and work together on solutions to your problems. They have you hook, line, and sinker. And worse yet, they're using you to destroy the future for your own children. That's what fear does. That's what unforgiveness does, and division, and confusion, and chaos, and pride, and the list goes on. Because what they want to do is to project their box onto you and make you get into a smaller one in your head. Is that not what's happening? Look at the Facebook feeds. Go onto YouTube and see what your feeds are. They are spoon feeding you yourselves every single day, and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and you don't even realize most of the time that you're being completely manipulated. So those of us that kind of stand in the middle ground are trying to get people to, come together and work on stuff. No one wants to do that. A few do. So we, having been put here to be folks to help other folks and to help fix things and turn things around, work with you guys and work with others, right? Or some of you guys. Some of you guys you know exactly what I'm saying because you're right here in the middle with the rest of us. But, when everybody's diverted like that, you don't realize you're being used as a proxy against us. In a sense, you're unknowingly being used as a soldier against us and against your own interests. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. A lot of us love you guys. We love you. We love this country. We'd like to see this country become something. We've got a vision for this country. There's been a few times I've driven through Saline County on the way back to Virginia or going up to St. Louis. And I've driven through El Dorado, Curry Mills, Galatia, Harrisburg, right? Just taking notes. Imagining what it could be for a future that means something beyond what it currently is right now. So that county and the surrounding counties don't have to be shoehorned into what these fools in D.C. choose to do with the coal industry with China. Because you're slaves because of that. And I have been holding on to, for a few years now, an entire plan for your entire county and all of Southern Illinois. Something that addresses issues on both sides of the divide. Something that addresses issues that affects everybody. Jobs, a healthy, prosperous future. The ability to actually, create an environment that people want to stay there and work and raise their families and have those opportunities. Every single place I go, I do that. But I in particularly do that in the places that are most dear to my heart. And because I lived as a child up until, I guess, the end of my junior year in Harrisburg, Saline County is dear to my heart. It's as much a hometown to me in many ways as any place I've ever known. I just want to see things get better for people. For years, I've tried to work here in America with people and tried to work on our problems. I am very good at what I do, and I'm not saying that because I'm trying to toot my own horn and I'm arrogant about it. I'm good at what I do because I put in the time and effort to do it. I could do it anywhere in the world. But it breaks my heart that I can't get traction here in my own country and even in the places where I frequent the most or grew up. Reminds me of the story of Nehemiah. I don't know if you're familiar with that story in the Bible. You know, Nehemiah was depressed. He was down. He was letting himself go. He was the cupbearer for the king at the time. And it was during the exile. And the king loved him. He considered him one of his most trusted servant and a close friend. And he's like, Nehemiah, what's wrong? Why are you so down all the time? Why are you letting yourself go? And he said, how can I be joyous when the walls of my city are torn down and my people are in chains? And the king's like, well, Nehemiah, why did you ever tell me? What do you need? Just tell me what you need and we'll make it happen. You can go and I'll send you whatever you need. Get it done. I'll free your people. Right? And then go home. You got to build it back. So tell me what you need to build it back. Nehemiah was amazed. I mean, he never thought to ask the king such a thing because he was a servant. But the king loved him. Nehemiah, he told him, he's like, well, I need these supplies and I'm going to need... He had a list. He had been thinking about it for years, what he needed. And so he took off from the royal city and made it back home. And Jerusalem was a mess. It was a ghetto. It was destroyed. It was filled with brigands. It was a mess. Well, he started repairing the walls. And every time they made a little progress, well, guess what happened? His biggest problems were his own people. It was in their best interest that Nehemiah build and rebuild Jerusalem and rebuild those walls, because those walls had to protect them, because they were surrounded on all sides by hostile forces. And not only were they being the problem, but Nehemiah saw that the hostile kings around them were inciting them to division and confusion, to keep Nehemiah and the people from being able to rebuild Jerusalem. Now think about what I just told you. The hostile forces were at work against Nehemiah, and who did they use? First and foremost, his own people. By sowing confusion, intrigue, division, and conflict among them. And then, of course, they would create even more hell attacking them. So, eventually, and I'll tell you the whole story some other time, but eventually Nehemiah got the job done. But it was much more difficult and had a lot more heartache for his people than there should have been. Because the people were standing in their own way of their own best interests. Now, is that not what you see happening in our own country right now? It is, isn't it? Divide and conquer. Our enemies knew they could not stick it to us as long as we were divided. They have spent the last 70, 80 years trying to divide us. And that's just the earthly ones. The division goes back to the spiritual realm, and that's been happening all along. Hell, we fought a civil war over it. We're practically in one now. Let me tell you about the 1% during the Civil War in Richmond. In Richmond, during the Civil War, they lived large. You can come to Richmond and I'll show you all the mansions. I mean, it was a lavish lifestyle. I'll also take you and show you where the slave trade was going on. And where one of the largest unmarked graves in America is, which is right across the road from where I live. So when it looked like Richmond was going to fall towards the end, as Grant's forces were moving in, what do you think Richmond turned into? Well, as things got worse and worse and worse, the elite had massive parties. They lived it up. They had masquerade balls and lavish feasts, and they would all get dressed up in expensive finery, and it was just total debauchery. Meanwhile, the rest of the citizens were starving to death, were broke, were dying, were sick. While the 1% had one last hurrah before they got their asses handed to them. Now, why would I tell you that? What do you think it was like outside of those posh mansions in those wealthy areas in Richmond? Well, it's hell. It's death. It's destruction. It's confusion. It's fear. It's terror. Uncertainty. So, when it looked like the city was imminent, and the troops were converging on Richmond, coming into the city limits, the elite and the elite Confederate soldiers that were there set the whole damn place on fire as they were leaving to bug out to save their own hides. 82 blocks of the city were on fire when Grant's men entered into the city, including the Capitol, which was designed and built by Thomas Jefferson, and all those fancy houses and those whole areas. Well, guess who stopped it? The Union troops. They saved the city. It had been burned to the ground. They saved Thomas Jefferson's Capitol. They saved a lot of those homes. And they saved a lot of people's lives that were outside of the elite. You see, it flipped around on the elite. The elite were in denial of their predicament. And by being in denial of it, they actually created the very conditions that led to a faster fall of Richmond. Meanwhile, you had Sherman tearing through the South. After the Battle of Atlanta, he burned his way all the way to Savannah, right? Yeah, right along this pathway, right where I'm sitting right now, not far up the roads where it came through. So, think about it. Why would I tell you those stories? What have you been seeing happen for the last 20 years in this country? Let's just take the last 3 administrations. What are they doing with your money right now? They're sure as hell not saving your businesses. Because they don't think about your future when all they can think of is their wants and needs right now. Why do you think they stall? Because it's about them. And not everybody who's wealthy or in the elite are like that, but the greater majority are. All the folks you look at, Hollywood is a great example of that. Remember I was telling you about, when I'm in Richmond, sometimes I go to the Hollywood Cemetery. It's an old, ancient cemetery. Ancient for the United States, that is. A lot of those elites in that 1%, right, are buried there. I'm working on a little mini documentary video about that to show you guys. Now think about Hollywood Cemetery. It was long before Hollywood that you know out in California ever existed. But it's funny how they're acting very similar. A lot of them. Hell, they even sold out one of the ports there and gave full rights to your enemies, China. Where you think all your cheap stuff comes in at? Everything that you buy. Now think about that. And think about that when you think about what's happening in the cities right now. Particularly New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Think about it. Think about how the 1% live there. They control those places and then force that on everybody else. They pretend that the 90 or so million people that live outside of urban America don't exist. But yet, your leaders, right, are almost exclusively from the 1%, whether it's the 1% nationally or the 1% in your own states, cities, and towns. How's that working for you? You ready for something new, something different? Because where I sit, you're falling into the same trap that we've always fallen into, and that is the left and the right paradigm. I am a post-party guy. I'll work with anybody that cares about people and cares about doing the right thing for everybody. But it's very difficult to find those kinds of people. But we find one another. You know, the last few days, I took a break from work, and I haven't been on checking my LinkedIn, or I've just been kind of quiet on there and quiet with my business folks. And I was amazed. I checked my messages today at how many folks got a hold of me from around the world and encouraged me and, thanked me for caring about this country and about the plight of their own. Sometimes you need just a little bit of encouragement to keep going, like you guys did for me the other day on my feed last week. I really appreciated that. But it's true when I tell you that if we're going to turn the corner with this country, it's not going to happen with people necessarily from New York and Chicago and New York, LA, the typical, right? East Coast, West Coast. It's going to happen with all of us. It's going to happen with real people, with real jobs, and people that want real jobs, and people that have real lives to change the paradigm and come together and work together. And your enemies and your elites are betting they can keep you from it. But there hasn't been one single nation on earth where that 1% hasn't gone too far and dug their own graves. And right now, they've done it globally. And in particular, they've done it in this country on both sides of the political aisle. Politics won't get you anywhere. I'm just telling you. Politics does not necessarily mean leadership. You have leaders. You have some fine people. Some right there in southern Illinois, some in St. Louis and in Missouri, some down here in Georgia and Virginia, all over the country. You've got a lot of people that go into public service because they want to make a difference. But the system itself is designed to corrupt everything. And that can't change until all of you are willing to work together, to come together, and let's forge a new path. Otherwise, our generation will be looked at like the one that's in power now, having screwed up not just their own generation, but not just the country as well either, but the entirety of the world. And that brings about some pretty heavy consequences for everyone's children and for all of us. Whether you reap them here or you deal with it on the other side. We have to get back to thinking big, thinking outside the box, but also doing the simple things. Raising our children right, getting real with our own lives, loving our neighbors, looking out for the highest good of others. And that means it has to be built on a strong foundation. And that foundation has to be in truth and love, that justice and mercy may prevail from humble and contrite hearts. Anything else won't suffice. It won't work. Because right now, the country is just simply not governable. You're too divided. And your enemies know it, and it's hurting you. And all the good stories and all the good stuff that people are doing is being lost in the noise of all the arguing and fighting, all the uncertainty and fear, and the myopathy that it brings. Because it blinds you to what God has already provided for you. And it makes you unintentionally, a lot of times, a roadblock to your own progress out of the dump that you've now found yourselves in. My friends, things are not going to return to normal, all right? They're going to be different. The question is, what kind of different are they going to be? Is it going to be better than what was normal? Or is it going to be a great deal worse? I can't make that decision for anybody. That's something everybody has to come to on their own. But I can assure you that God has already provided you with people in this country that are more than equipped and ready to work with you to help change things for the good, for everybody. Not based on political parties necessarily, but based upon what is right and true. You see, you got to understand, we cannot remain in a state of paralysis. Our country's falling down around us. Our infrastructure is falling apart. It's outdated. The longer you let it go, the more expensive it is to actually fix it. And the more dangerous it is to actually use it. And the more it hurts your economic ability to be productive. You also are being bought out by your enemies. Okay? You've handed over, a good 30% or more of your agricultural lands to China alone. Every nation on earth buys you up. Now, is that the normal you want to go back to? Because I can assure you that if you stay on that path, that normal, right, is going to turn into very bad, abnormal consequences very fast because you're being set up. And that is not a Democrat or Republican thing. That's a bigger thing. It's people across the board, Weeds don't go to the left or the right when you're planting a garden. They come up all over it. And you've got a lot of very mature weeds in your garden here in America. And you know what weeds do? Why they're so bad for a crop if you put in a garden? Because the weeds steal all the resources, all the nutrients from the soil that the good plants need to grow. Now think about what I just said. If the weeds are sucking up all the water, all the nutrients, the good crops, the garden that you planted, can't grow very well. Except a few hardy ones here and there. Now put that into the context of what you're dealing with as a country, within your country, and now put that into a context as the country among all the rest of the nations. And that'll give you a little perspective on what you're dealing with. You see why it is, I keep telling you, you cannot continue down the road that you were on and expect that your future for your kids and even yourselves will be bright and shiny. This is the silver lining underneath all this madness that's gone on. Instead of focusing on conspiracies right now, right? Because everybody's focusing on all these things, right? What they're not focusing on is solutions and things that we can do together to turn the tide. That just plays right into your enemy's hands. You can post 1,000 times about whatever conspiracy's out there. But if you focus things on what people can do now for solutions to deal with practical problems, and if you focus on coming together so that we can work together on something that is an inspiring future for everybody, that is a death knell to your enemies. That's what they fear the most. As Americans waking up, coming together, and building a better country. One that the rest of the world will emulate and demand from their 1% and their weeds. Consider it. It's going to mean you're going to have to think beyond your box. It's going to mean that you're going to have to sacrifice some now, in the short term, for a better mid and long term. The predicament you're in right now, things have gone so far, you're being stolen blind. So if we're going to stop that, we've got to first stop the hemorrhaging so that we can stabilize the patient. Once we stabilize the patient, then we can move on to actually mitigating the malady. And once we mitigate the malady, we can bring things back to full health and beyond. Otherwise, we're going to be in a terminal condition as a nation. And we will continue down the road of entropy and tyranny until all we're fighting over is rust and desolation that's left. Now we can change this by the grace of God and by humbling ourselves and really thinking beyond ourselves and digging deep and facing the fear. Facing the uncertainty. You see, uncertainty works with fear to keep you from actually doing anything. It paralyzes you, and it hands your future over to somebody else to write it that is hostile to you. I, for one, am not willing to accept that. I hope, and I think, most of you agree with me on that. So let's put our enemies back in their box and lock it and throw it into the fire. And let's think outside of the ones they've tried to give us and force us into. What do you say? Does that sound like a plan? Does that sound like a deal? Think about it.